This is the second video on forward agreements. This is video part 1B. Part 1 focuses on the characteristics of the forward agreement, the views of each of the parties, and how settlement works. In part B, we're going to change the characteristics by adding assignability through Novation, and then we'll look at the applications of forward contracts for hedging and speculation. In the case of assignability, what we're really talking about is one person replaces another person in that position. So the seller could find somebody to become a seller and they leave the forward agreement. The buyer could find a replacement and leave the agreement with a new buyer, or both parties could be replaced. Essentially, it's a three-party agreement. There's always a seller, there's always a buyer, but now, unlike the basic agreement, there's a clearinghouse. The gains from Novation: both parties have liquidity, which wasn't true with the basic agreement. Each party posts collateral for unfavorable price changes. There was no collateral in the basic agreement. If prices rise and the buyer has paper gains, the seller's collateral is held by the clearinghouse to be able to pay those paper gains. Conversely, if the price had been falling, the buyer would have to have sufficient collateral to cover the gains to the seller. So essentially, both parties are putting up with the clearinghouse collateral to cover potential paper losses to the counterparty. The clearinghouse keeps records of who the people are who are the seller and the buyer. These are all party names. Holds the collateral for price protection and charges fees. So let's look at an example of what happens when a party changes. So here the seller is going to change. The forward price on Tuesday is $20. The market price is $19B, or it could be $22. If we look at price A, the buyer has a paper loss of 19 minus 20, or minus $1, so the seller has a paper gain. B, if the price is 22, the buyer has a paper gain, so the seller has a paper loss. Remember, collateral is being held by the clearinghouse to cover the paper loss of $1 by the buyer, or the paper loss of $2 by the seller. Cowboy is the original seller. Roger replaces Cowboy as the seller. If the position has gains, like in A, of $1, Roger pays Cowboy $1. Cowboy exits the forward agreement with a $1 gain. Roger has now paid out $1, but the contract has a paper gain of $1, leaving him neutral. If the position had been a loss, like in B, of $2, Cowboy would have had to pay Roger $2. Now Cowboy has sustained a loss but left the contract. Roger would have $2 of money flowing in to cover the paper loss of $2, leaving him neutral. Cowboy receives his collateral back from the clearinghouse. Roger posts collateral with the clearinghouse, and Roger is the new seller on the clearinghouse books. What we see here is Cowboy exited the forward agreement either with a paper gain or with a real gain or a real loss. That's liquidity. That's the basic purpose of Novation. So let's take a look at a stylized version of the books of the dealer or clearinghouse. The settlement is on 3/26. Forward price is $20. The market price is $20.75. So it's going to be cash settlement of $27.75 minus 20, or 75 cents to the buyer. Both parties entered the agreement on Friday, March 15. Cowboy is the seller. Wonder Woman is the buyer. Tuesday the 19th, Roger replaces Cowboy. Cowboy either leaves with a gain or a loss. Nothing's going on the buyer's side. On Thursday, the 21st, Mary becomes the replacement for Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman leaves with either gain or loss. Mary is now the buyer. Nothing happens with the seller. We get to March 26, Tuesday, the settlement date. Roger is the seller. Mary is the buyer. The price is a 75-cent gain. Some money comes out of Roger's collateral account to pay Mary her 75 cents. Mary leaves with her collateral plus 75-cent gain. Roger leaves with his collateral less 75-cent loss. What we've seen here is the record keeping and the cash settlement by the clearinghouse on the last day. So let's return to the characteristics of the forward agreement. Both the standard and the forward agreement have customization. In the Novation or assignable agreement, there's transactions done through a clearinghouse with a fee. That's not true with a standard or basic contract. There's liquidity with Novation. There's none in the basic contract. There's no counterparty credit risk with Novation. There is credit risk with the basic agreement. There's no collateral in the basic agreement, but here there's collateral to protect against unfavorable price changes. There's no payment from the clearinghouse until expiration. basic agreement, the two parties wouldn't have settled until expiration. There is a receive or pay by the party who is coming in to replace the party who is leaving. So when we saw before, Cowboy left with a dollar gain or Cowboy left with a $2 loss, that cash flow occurs because of liquidity gains, has nothing to do with the expiration of the contract. So now let's take a look at applications of the forward agreement. It can be used for hedging against unfavorable price changes. It can be used to speculate on favorable price changes. So look at two examples of hedging. The first one we're looking at is where there is a price increase. The second is a price decrease. The buyer and the seller protect against unfavorable price changes, increase or decrease, by giving up any favorable price changes. So if you kind of think about it, the seller would like to sell at a higher price, but he's avoiding selling at a lower price. The buyer is avoiding paying a higher price in the hope of getting a lower price. Now you're not. You're just getting one price. Forward price is 2050. Expiration is 90 days. Let's assume that the stock market price is 21, so the cash settlement on the forward agreement will be 50 cents. Buyer purchases in the cash market stock, paying $21, but receives from the forward 50 cents, so net the cost of the stock is $20.50. Exactly the same as the forward agreement. The seller sells stock in the market for $21 and pays the buyer 50 cents, so he receives 21 less 50. Net the seller receives $20.50 on the sale of the stock, same price as the forward agreement. So they've locked in this price. The key thing is the buyer paid did not pay $21, but because of the agreement paid $20.50. And the seller did not get the $21 they'd like to have gotten because he paid 50 cents on the forward. They're both transacting at $20.50. So the only change in this story is the market price is $19. So the settlement is 19 minus $20.50 or $1.50. So in this particular case, the buyer purchases stock in the stock market for $19, but pays in the forward agreement $1.50. So net the cost of the stock in total is $20.50. The seller sells the stock in the market for $19, but receives $1.50 from the buyer. So net the seller receives $20.50, exactly the same as the forward. They've locked in that $20.50 forward price. They don't benefit from price increases or decreases. They don't suffer from price increases or decreases. They've locked in that price. Now let's turn to speculation. Buyer expects the price to rise above the forward price. The seller expects the price will be less than the forward price. Examples using cash settlement. Price today is $20. The forward price is $20.50. Settlement is basically negative 50 cents. Buyer is going to pay the seller 50 cents. So on settlement date, the buyer pays the seller 50 cents. Why? Because the price is less than the $20.50, the forward price, which is the view of the seller. If we look at price at $23, the forward price $20, there's a gain of $20.50. Buyer receives $20.50 from the seller. So the buyer wins this by receiving $20.50 because of the speculation the price would rise above the forward price. The price is $23, but he's only getting a $2.50 gain because it's compared with the forward price. So we've seen the role of novation, and we've seen the use of forwards as a hedge to lock in a price, and we looked at using a forward contract to take a position on in a market view. The advantage of a forward contract, though, is you don't pay anything at all when you start the contract, and there's no money exchanged until expiration. If you had bought the stock and later sold it, you would have spent money to buy the stock. You later would have sold the stock, and you'd have a capital gain or a capital loss. Forward contract avoids that initial expenditure of purchasing the stock. There's no cash outlay. You're simply speculating on price change.